Before maps were digital and satellites watched every ridge, a handful of American soldiers held a nameless hill in Korea, with nothing but cold hands, dying radios, and the quiet fear that no one would remember them if they vanished. This is the story of Hill 312, an outpost that shouldn't have mattered, but ended up shaping the entire battle line. The cold came first. It crept under gloves, slid through jackets, and settled deep into bone. Private Sam Kincaid had been in Korea for 3 months and still wasn't used to how the wind sounded like a blade. He sat in a shallow foxhole with Corporal Diaz, both staring out over a valley washed in moonlight, so bright it looked like silver spilled across the ground. Hill 312 wasn't a place anyone would pick to defend. Too exposed, too far forward, too lonely. But the High Command believed the Chinese might push through this sector to circle around the 2nd Infantry Division. If they took 312, they'd get access to the road to Kapyong. If they got the road, the entire line could buckle. Captain Harlow had said it plainly, no drama. Gentlemen, we're the cork in a very ugly bottle. Kincaid didn't feel like a cork. He felt like a man who hadn't slept in 30 hours, whose boots were stiff with frost, whose rifle jammed if he breathed too hard. Still, when Diaz tapped his shoulder, he straightened. "You hear that?" Diaz whispered. Kincaid listened. Nothing but wind. Then, faint cracks, twigs, soft, deliberate. Movement. Diaz's jaw tightened. They're here. The Chinese attacked without warning. No flares, no shouted orders, just shadows breaking loose from the dark slopes below and rushing upward in a wave of bodies and muffled boots. Kincaid fired until the rifle kicked numbness into his shoulder. Tracer rounds carved bright lines through the night, cutting down figures that kept coming anyway. The first assault lasted 7 minutes. The second began 12 minutes later. By the third, most of the sandbags at the forward trench were torn open, spilling frozen dirt. When dawn crept over the ridge, Kincaid saw how close they had come to being overrun. Bodies lay twisted on the slope like discarded coats. The smell of cordite hung in the air, sharp and metallic. Lieutenant Mercer jogged over, face streaked with soot. "The radio's hit," he said. "We can receive, but we can't send." Kincaid blinked. "So they don't know we're still here?" "They think we fell back," Mercer said, "but we didn't, and we can't." By noon, the Chinese regrouped. Their bugles echoed across the valley, haunting, shrill, impossible to ignore. The men of Hill 312 braced themselves. Ammunition was low. The medic, Tillman, had 3 bandages left. Captain Harlow was down with a leg wound, but refused morphine. "Keep your heads," he told them. "If we hold until nightfall, they'll send reinforcements." "Do they know we're here?" Diaz didn't answer. The 4th wave hit harder than anything before. Mortar rounds crashed against the upper ridge, sending shards of rock flying like knives. Kincaid ducked, felt a sting along his cheek, and wiped away blood with a numb hand. Diaz dragged a rifleman backward, while Tillman tried to stop the bleeding. The line bent. It didn't break. Kincaid remembered none of the fighting after that, only flashes, a Chinese soldier lunging at him with a bayonet, the jolt of firing point blank, and the deafening roar of their last functioning machine gun tearing through the charge. When the smoke settled, Hill 312 was a cratered ruin. Only 23 Americans were still able to stand, 41 wounded, 7 dead. Mercer leaned against a smashed bunker, eyes hollow. "We can't take another one," he said. But another one was coming. Just before dusk, the valley filled with a low hum. Not bugles, engines, multiple. Kincaid crawled to the ridge and saw something he thought was a hallucination. Tanks. American tanks rumbling toward the hill, flanked by infantry, the white star gleaming on their hulls. Behind them, columns of UN troops, the reinforcements command had been trying to send, but no one knew 312 had held long enough to need them. A radio operator jumped from the lead tank and stared up in disbelief. "You people, you were supposed to be gone." Mercer wiped grit from his eyes. "We didn't get that memo." What happened next didn't feel heroic. It felt tired. The soldiers on Hill 312 didn't cheer. They didn't raise rifles. They simply watched as fresh troops pushed past them to secure the valley. A medic bandaged Kincaid's cheek. Diaz sat beside him, silent, staring down at the ground where they had fought for nearly a full day. Later, when the hill was surveyed, commanders realized something remarkable. If 312 had fallen in the first attack, Chinese forces would have poured through the gap and slammed into the division's flank. The entire front line might have collapsed. Instead, the Americans held long enough for reinforcements to arrive, regroup, and fortify the sector. A nameless hill had changed the shape of the battlefield. Kincaid learned this weeks later, during a rare, quiet morning. A new lieutenant mentioned it casually, like stating the weather. "You're one of the 312 men? Hell of a stand." Kincaid didn't know what to say. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who survived when others didn't. Someone who still heard bugles in his sleep. Years later, long after the war, Hill 312 finally received its name on military maps. Veterans called it Last Light Ridge, because for 23 hours the men there fought with the last of their strength, the last of their ammunition, and almost the last of their hope. But they didn't lose the hill, and because of that, thousands of others lived to see morning.